James Mirtle is back from his vacation just in time for deadline week. What a professional. James Mirtle of The Athletic joins me now. What's up, buddy? How we doing?
Yeah, you don't go on vacation for trade deadline. This is like our Super Bowl, right?
Yeah, Stanley Cup Finals is one, but I would say that still trade deadline holds a far more special place than free agency, right? Even though this year's free agency is probably going to be more compelling with the cap going up, maybe it can finally supplant it. But deadline still gives people, especially of our age, the feels.
Yeah. There's extra juice for free agency because you have the draft and then you have all the trades and it all like piles in together and then and then your season's over kind of for a little while. But I know for us in the writing job, like that's like really where you got to lean in and work every single day and do as much as you can. There's really the two windows. It's draft free agency is one and trade deadline's number two. So. Yeah. We'll see if it justifies it this year, though.
Yeah, well, I can tell you from just like a work standpoint, when it starts to lead up to the deadline, God, the amount of out-of-market hockey that I add to my diet, right, is so much more. I watched so much hockey yesterday. I'm up late watching the Golden Knights get a 2-0 win. I watched Sheldon Keefe get ejected, by the way. He was real mad. He's fiery. Jack Hughes gets hurt. I'm watching the Blues. I'm trying to give real close attention to their playoff race. You're trying to take in as much hockey as possible, especially the teams that have players on them that the teams you cover are linked to. But I want to start with this. So Flyers have been hot. Blues are right there, and they're only behind a couple of teams that I don't think inspire a ton of confidence amongst their fan bases that they're going to be able to do something. Like, do people in Vancouver think that they're a lock for the postseason? Do people in Calgary view this as like a super important playoff push? I don't really think so. All of a sudden, these teams are very much in the mix. And you are someone who's already been preaching or warning at least people of another tree-living conservative deadline. How do you think these records are now playing a factor in this, especially with the players that have been rumored to Toronto?
Yeah, I think it could be a factor. I mean, St. Louis, we can talk about them first. I mean, there's still, last I looked at, something like a 20% chance to make the playoffs, but with the teams in front of them, not exactly juggernauts. The thing with the Blues is that the players they're looking at moving, they don't have to move right now. You know, they can just keep them and trade them in the offseason. You know, Brayden Schenn's got 3 more years on his deal, and there's probably more teams involved, and potentially get a better return. So there's like literally zero pressure on them to move him right now. And that's going to mean is that they can just ask for the moon and not budge if they don't get what they want, because, you know, they can continue to try and make that push for the playoffs, keep the players and not worry about it. So my concern with not just the idea of the Leafs having a conservative deadline, I think this is probably going to be a pretty conservative trade deadline. And you know, there's 4 days left and I can be proven wrong and they're maybe Rantanen goes again and there's some big moves, but I just look at the landscape. There's not a lot of sellers. The sellers that are there are asking for a lot. There's not a lot of great rental players. I think this could be one of those trade deadlines where we get to the end of the day and be like, boy, like not a lot happened.
Yeah. I will say this is there are enough names that have been floated now that there should be legitimate intrigue. And you've seen Elliott, right, on headlines, and he's talking about how much the market is being held up right now by Rantanen and this decision that Carolina has to make. I still think Carolina rolls the dice and keeps him just from, like, they can't win that trade now, right? You move off of them. Who's giving you a return that was as good as the one that you moved out the door? And so does that really change it optically? The only way out for you, I think, is you have a successful playoff run, and then that 8th year holds some weight, and that the uncertainty, as uncomfortable as it is still the only path that you go down. But yeah, I guess it could get interesting with Rantanen. I don't know. The Blues lose Wednesday. I think, who do they play? They play somebody relevant. That they're like they play the Kings. So they play the Kings Wednesday. They lose that game. Kings are sitting there, I think, with the 7th best record in the Western Conference. And maybe that does change the math a little bit for them. But yeah, when I'm looking at this right now, I don't think anybody has really any urgency. Why do the Flyers have urgency to have to move off of Lawton right now, when a year from now, if they're not doing well, or if they do take a step forward, he could be an important piece. But yeah, a year from now, if you decided to trade him as a $3 million rental piece, my guess is you would still get a pretty decent return because centers always command a market.
Yeah, and I think off-season trades too, right? Like we talked about around the draft, there's going to be lots of movement, and with the cap going up as much as it does, there's going to be a lot of teams with a lot of room looking to do something, and free agency is not really a great class. So I suspect it's going to be a really, really busy offseason on the trade front, and it makes a lot of sense for those teams to wait. So, I think we're probably going to get there, but I don't think the Schenn thing is going to happen just because of all those factors with St. Louis and also the term on the deal and how much he makes. For the Leafs to make it work, looking at the cap situation, they got to get that cap hit well down from 6.5. Mm-hmm. And then St. Louis is just going to ask for even more to make that happen. So that's going to be the complicating factor to get that done.
Yeah, I don't think that there's really a chance that the Leafs would entertain these conversations without asking for retention.
No, 100%. Yeah. They have to. You really, unless you can find someone to take Max Domi, they can't take on a big salary like that. I think they're going to need full retention on any players they get. I think they're still trying to add a defenseman and a center, and I think they're going to need 50% retention on both of them.
Yeah. Okay, so I do want to get into the cases for some of these guys because I think it's a good exercise and I think it's a fun exercise, and I do want to go over some of the pros and cons of these players because I haven't spoken to you, I think, in almost 3 weeks maybe. But I do want to start with the cap stuff because, again, this is your bread and butter. You're as good with the cap as anybody who covers this sport. And it appears that Kelly Yarncroft's going to play tonight. I think that's already been stated. He's going to be back. On this team, he's a forward who actually makes money because it's not the minimum or $1 million or something like Pacioretty's where it's got built-in incentives to try to pay him more if he can play a certain amount of games. How does this work just from that standpoint? Because, my understanding is this is a team that's already capped out. They're able to move off the Pacioretty money because he's on the IR. They're not paying Hakanpää against the cap. But, how tight are they with the return of Yarncroft to begin with?
So they have already sent down the extra pieces that they had. It was Marshall Rafai and Alex Steeves. So that frees up, $1.6 million. And that's enough to activate Yarncroft for tonight against San Jose. So they've made those two moves, send the Marlies down, free up enough salary to bring Yarncroft in. But now they're basically at the limit. There's almost no room left. Mm-hmm. They've got enough room for to bring one of those minor league players back. That's basically it. So trying to make any kind of a trade with the room they've got now is impossible. So, in the story I wrote today for The Athletic, it's just looking at, okay, so how are they going to free up this room? What are they going to do? And it's really just looking at the bottom of the roster and which pieces are they going to be willing to move off of. And the other thing too is that they're really close to the roster limit, and the roster limit's in effect until after the trade deadline. And that limit is 23 active players. So players are going to have to go. They can't bring in more pieces and keep everything that they've got. So they'll have to make a decision. And the decision is going to be on players like we've been talking about all year, Nick Robertson, Connor Dewar, Ryan Reeves, Connor Timmins, go down the list. The kind of players on the fringe of the roster, maybe not making a ton of money, but if you move off of two or three of them, all of a sudden you've got enough room to bring in probably two impact players, especially with retention involved.
Can I tell you that it has really felt like to me these last couple Ryan Reeves games have been his retirement tour?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's only played, hasn't he played once in the last, the New York game is one of the only times he's played recently.
Yeah, but he played in two in a row.
Right, right.
So it's 2 games in a row that he's played. And I just thought, hey, you know what? He looks kind of fresh. In the sense of he's throwing the body around, and I thought that he was moving for him well. But ultimately, I don't think he's a guy that really has a real prayer of cracking the playoff roster. And even you saw that Rangers game where his line got completely hemmed in. And there's also this weird thing where you watch them because they have to take defensive zone draws, especially they've got David Kampf. He's their defensive matchup center, but then he's on a line with Ryan Reeves, who Yeah,
No,
when the
never made sense.
Yeah, it doesn't fit. It doesn't, especially with the personnel they have, Lorentz and Dewar and Kampf. Even if you rolled those guys out as a fourth line, I think that can work for you defensively. But as soon as you remove one of those pieces and insert Reeves, it doesn't. So that's money that you can automatically free up. I think that the next interesting one though is whether or not Nick Robertson has actually increased some trade value here because. Yeah, I don't think that the Leafs have changed their mind on him as a player. And so this is really going to come down to whether or not he has a market if he's on this team or not.
I think it comes down to do they need the money or not, really. And they probably
I think they're
do.
going to need the money, though. That's why I asked the cap question first, is that it's like this team wants to add. They're not going to go through this cycle without adding some sort of depth to their blue line. And I don't think that they're going to go past this without adding a center. To me, they're going to do those two things. It's just a question of what is the degree. That's the real question here. It's not if, it's what.
I don't think it's the return for Robertson, though, right? Like, I don't think that whether or not if he's increased his value, what does it increase to? A fourth round pick? Like, it's not going to be.
I think you're hoping for more than that, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't see it, but maybe they can get a third.
Well, Liljegren got a third.
Maybe they can. I mean, Liljegren, that deal had a bunch of pieces in it, right? Like they took back bad money on Benning and stuff like that. But I don't think it's the return on Robertson. They're looking at the composition of their team, and the player they bring in is probably going to be a gritty third line center type player. It's either going to be, Lawton or someone like Lawton, and probably around that kind of contract size. And if that player comes into the lineup, Robertson's not going to be playing because he can't play on that fourth line that you talked about with the composition of it. You've got Yarncroc coming in now who potentially does play on that fourth line with Kampf in more of a defensive role than we've seen from him before. And your third line becomes Domi moves to the wing, McMahon's the other winger, and the center that you get. And there's nowhere for Robertson to go.
I think the case would be, hey, do you try him up on the second line? But I actually think ultimately that's where once we see a few games, my guess is that Yarncroc ends up on the second line with Nylander and Tavares.
Or McMahon. I mean, so I don't, unless someone gets hurt here this week before the deadline, I don't know where the fit is for Robertson, and they need the money. And so the decision for them is, I think you're right. I think Reeves is a relatively easy decision. You waive him, probably doesn't get claimed, goes down to the Marlies, and you can call him up if someone gets hurt or for the playoffs, and he can be the good guy in the dressing room again. You got to think about, do you want to either trade Robertson or you could waive Connor Dewar? Dewar's going to give you more money because he's got a higher cap hit than Robertson. And then if you're making a move on defense, you're going to have to trade one of the defensemen, I think, to make that money work.
It's tough for me to picture the Dewar waiving simply because they just gave him a contract extension.
When was the contract extension?
In the offseason. He was he was a pending free agent, and they decided to extend him that offseason. And just if you're looking at like the types of guys,
he was an RFA, and like the 1.1 million, and I don't know.
I still have a tough time picturing it as much. Although it's like that is an interesting question if you are the Leafs and you're trying to free up money. Is if you're not getting any type of return for Nick Robertson, and conceivably you can still sit him as well. Would you rather lose out on a guy who can actually score goals because you didn't want to waive someone who's a defensive fourth liner who you gave 1.1 million to? I think that if it was me, as much as like this is going to cost me my status amongst the dudes, I'd rather waive Dewar. I'd rather do that.
He might
situation.
go through.
Yeah.
He might clear waivers too, and then you've got him for the playoffs, right? And if you run into some injuries or whatever, he can be someone that comes in. I just think with the contract they gave Dewar, he's played 29 games. He hasn't scored a goal yet. He's only got 3 points.
That's what I mean.
He hasn't given them enough to justify the number that he's at. And the thing, too, is they've got to probably move off of 3 players. So if it's not Dewar and it's not Robertson, it's going to have to be someone else. And I don't see them trading Kampf, and I don't think they're going to be able to trade Max Domi right now. I just think the economic conditions are too tight.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you next, is the odds of them being able to get 15 teams from him that they could move him to, and what the reception would be like from the league trying to take that money.
Yeah, I feel like that's just adding a degree of difficulty to an already difficult week for them. That's just not going to happen. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they've kept it really quiet, and that's something they've been looking at and shopping around. But I haven't heard any talk about them potentially moving him. I think that as much as he makes, I think that they want to keep him and have him on the playoff roster, and he can bring a kind of like a playoff type game and maybe score a big goal or set up a big goal for them in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, for Dallas, that's kind of the role that he ended up playing.
Yeah. I know it hasn't worked out for them this year, but they're still crossing their fingers and hoping that that's what's going to happen.
I guess the Domi question has continued to come up for me because if they were moving for Schenn, right? If you were trying to make the case of bringing in real money here, because like my buddy Justin Bourne brought up the idea of like, hey, the Leafs should really try to pursue Colton Parayko. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, you should, but I look at what the Leafs have, and I think I don't know how you get into that conversation with St. Louis. Like, I just don't know how they decide they're going to move off that player, and that you can make the fit work, and that even if he was available, that Toronto would have the types of pieces that they would be interested in for him that are not on the roster currently, right? Like, I get it if you're putting Matthew Nyes in the trade, but I don't want to do that, Like, that's not really of serious interest for me. So it decides, you go, okay, well, you want Easton Cowan and these picks and a prospect, and they would go, we can probably do better from another organization, and someone will do that for that caliber of player. So that's why I haven't really done that one too much, is I just have a really tough time seeing how Toronto would get in the mix for that. Schenn, to me, is the, like, non-Rantanen, I guess, highest upside guy that they could go out and acquire. Yes, there's the Dylan Cousins thing, and do I think that would be a better long-term fit for the organization? Sure. I just, again, what are the pieces that you're moving for Dylan Cousins that make sense for the Sabres?
The Leafs aren't really in on him.
Yeah, that's it. So it's like I've tried to focus the conversation onto things, because one of the responses I've been getting a lot recently from people is, everyone can be available in a trade, right? The thinking that you can overwhelm someone for a piece that fits your organization better. But we're talking about the guys that are kind of available, and they're not even all that available, right? For the pieces that the Leafs could potentially be offering. So I think that there is a little bit of a misalignment of the fan base's understanding of how valuable the prospects and the pick is that Toronto has versus the reality of the situation of even them trying to be aggressive, which obviously Tree Living has been calling every single team, and what they're even able to do with these things and their cap situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I've been looking at this because I've been looking at kind of like some prospects that could get traded around the league over the weekend. And Easton Cowan, I think we had him rated as like the 43rd or 44th best drafted prospect in the league. Like, it's not like you're dangling a top 10 surefire star player.
He doesn't just automatically go to the top of the pile of whoever you're competing with.
No, because if other teams can put a prospect that's ranked higher than him into the mix if they want to, especially if you're talking about a player like Parayko, who just played for Canada at Four Nations and looked like a beast. I mean, so yeah, no, I mean the Leafs don't have a lot of cap space. They don't have a lot of prospect ammunition. They don't have a lot of picks. It's so like they're probably not able to deal for the marquee players. And again, there are not a lot of marquee players available either. So I don't think they're going to be able to make it work with Schenn. I don't think they're going to be able to overwhelm St. Louis to the point where they say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do this. But I think they're going to be able to do something, and I think that the Leafs have a list of, their A option, B, C, all the way down to, E and F. And there's some decent depth options, at least for centers anyway, that I think they're going to be able to get. So I'm optimistic they're going to be able to do something. The question over, how exciting is it going to be? I guess we're going to see here.
So just for fun, because I do want to ask you about who you think that these guys are going to end up being. But just for fun, I'd like to make the Schenn case, because people have been coming after me about it. And I think that you are a perfect foil in this situation, because I think you are very much in the camp of like, hey, this guy's on the decline and would not be the perfect fit for this organization. And yeah, that this is too risky of a move. Am I mischaracterizing you in any way? Would you like
let me couch that. I don't like him at $6.5 million, but if the conversation is him at half his salary, then I think that he's That would be great.
Yes.
That would be getting a player who's worth, he has declined. He's not a $6.5 million player, but if you're getting him for $3.5 or $4 million, then sign me up.
Okay, so I guess part of my argument starts with that, which is I don't think that the Leafs would be moving multiple of the few assets that they have to acquire him if that wasn't the implication of the deal, right? Is one, we've already just gone over what their cap space is. They can't make it work without that. So to me, it's like you're doing one of two things. One is you're getting them to take Max Domi, and then you're saying, well, if you're looking at the way these contracts are, you're moving off of this money that was, frankly, it's a bad contract. It just is. I think Max can be an effective player. I like him when he's going well. There's a lot of things about his game that I do enjoy, but this is now 2 full seasons with the Leafs where we've had super lengthy conversations about what's going on with him and where does he fit. But the more realistic one is the retention, that you're saying, okay, you're going to eat a bunch of this money and he's coming here as a $4.5 million player. And to me, that's like fairly palatable for the following reasons. Number one, yes, is there decline with the numbers? Absolutely there is. When you're acquiring an older player, especially one who is as physical as him, I think the miles are a little bit different. And you say, okay, you're adding another left-handed centerman who's old and who might not age very well, but you are adding him on 4.5, not 6.5. That's just part of the framework of this conversation that I want to have. If you look at his line, according to Money Puck right now, I thought that this was super interesting. Amongst the highest scoring lines, at least 200 minutes played 5-on-5. Do you want to guess where Schenn's line is?
Honestly, I don't even know if I could name his 2 line mates that he's played with the most
Holloway
this year.
and Kyrou. So those 2 guys at 5-on-5, their goals percentage, 70%. They've been the 12th most effective line 5-on-5 in the NHL. These are the lines that you can compare them with. Right below them, at, by the way, 61.7, harder matchups, like it's a top line versus them who is not a top line. But Gensel Point Kucherov has 61.7% of the goals percentage for. And goals for per 60 minutes, you look at that line, 3.72 in comparison to Nyes, Matthews, Marner, 4.01. I'm not trying to make the case here that this is the best line in hockey or that this is like one of the elite lines in hockey. But one of the things that we focused on with the Leafs is, can they score 5-on-5 in the postseason? Can they get depth scoring? And what Schenn's line has proven all season long, despite his decline in those raw numbers, is that his line scores 5-on-5. That they, against good matchups, are still able to produce at that level. And if you think about what the Leafs need, and you thought about putting him beside a Bobby McMann and potentially a Max Domi or somebody else, you got to figure that that is going to be one of the better, I don't know, third lines in the NHL from an actual offensive standpoint. Case number 2, Schenn has more hits than anybody on the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. And do I think that that's sometimes an overrated stat? Do I think that is something that is a difficult one to completely pin down? There's a reason why hits don't end up on every single hockey site pages, but he would lead the Leafs. Here's some of the guys that are right behind him: Benoit, Lorentz, Pacioretty, Dewar, Reeves, and McCabe. Those are the Leafs' top 6 hitters, all again behind him. How many of those guys are you certain are actually going to be on the playoff roster? We've already removed Reeves. We're potentially removing Dewar. We don't know about Pacioretty's health. Like, basically, the only
Benoit might not be on the playoff roster either if they acquire a D. Yeah.
That's what I mean. You've got Lorentz and McCabe as 2 of your top 6 hitters that are on the team right now that provide a physical presence for this team. He is a captain. He is a Stanley Cup winner. These are things that we put a lot of discussion into. I think that there is also an implication that if he was to agree to come here, that there is a pairing with his brother, that you're also kind of getting essentially what is a package deal. I really don't get the...
Yeah, I don't get the sense that was going to happen, to be honest.
You didn't get the sense that they were going to come together?
They were going to bring both the Schenns, yeah.
Oh, damn. That's so much of the fun for me. But anyway, that's essentially my case here, is that as much as people want to say that like he's declining or he's washed up or he's terrible, if you're talking about this Leafs team as a 2-year window, Schenn is just about as good as you are going to possibly do, especially on that number. And then I didn't even mention this part of it, is if you're bringing him in at $4 million or $4.5 million, right, with the retention, I think that this does give you a little bit more leverage in the John Tavares conversation, because now you have at least a little bit of cost certainty moving forward. Do I think that Schenn is as good as Tavares? I do not. I don't. Tavares can clearly still produce at a level that, to me is more important than the intangibles that Brayden Schenn is going to bring with, hitting and some depth scoring. But Tavares reportedly wants $7 million. And if you're asking me, would I rather have Tavares at 7 or potentially even more than that, or Brayden Schenn at 4.5? I think that there is a conversation to be had there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think all of that is fair, but the complicating factor is that to get that level of retention out of St. Louis with them not feeling the pressure is going to cost you a lot because Schenn has 3 more years on his deal.
Yep.
So the Blues are going to be sitting looking at that dead cap hit for 3 more years.
Mm-hmm.
And the Leafs pulled it off with Jake McCabe when they got Chicago to eat half his salary for 2.5 seasons.
I think they pulled it off against the worst general manager potentially in all of hockey. So just for some context on that trade, can you tell me a worse GM than Kyle Davidson?
Certainly the knives are out around the league is what I will say. When I don't know if you saw last week, we did a survey of all the player agents around the league, and there were a number of them that didn't speak highly of Chicago's front office. So,
yeah. I mean, they took on Mrazek to move down 10 spots in the draft. It's just, they've done the Leafs some favors, and that McCabe trade was one of them. And also, I'm glad that you asked about the expensive pieces. So I agree with you. If this trade gets done, it will be viewed by many as an overpay, which I will say is the exact same thing. From a talent standpoint and for the retention, you are going to have to pay through the nose. My pushback to that is, if you're going to have to use one of those pieces in a trade for Scott Laughton anyways, then I would rather put 2 pieces in and get Braden Schenn.
Yeah, I think that's fair. As long as you can get that number down.
For sure.
And I think the thing, too, that you didn't mention is that on the Leafs, Schenn is going to be playing far more sheltered minutes.
Correct.
So you're not asking him to do as much as he's done in St. Louis, and that can make all of his, defensive stats and underlying numbers look better than they do now. So it's a fit. I mean, I think it makes sense for the Leafs to look at it. It just sounds like the conversations have been that the ask is just too much, and they're going to go a different direction. And maybe it's something you revisit in the off season. Maybe something you revisit at the trade deadline next year. And St. Louis being close to potentially making the playoffs, I think complicates it a little bit even more. But there's no question he's a fit. I think as long as the expectations for Schenn are reasonable, then you go into it eyes wide open. But he's 34 in August.
Mm-hmm.
You got 3 more years on the deal. It sounds like you're talking about giving up a first-round pick and one of your top prospects for him. And I think that's where people get nervous because they wonder can you get a better player for that package?
I think if you could do a first-round pick in Fraser Minten, you do it. And I was very reluctant to move Minten because I thought, hey, this guy is representing something that you haven't had for a lot of years, which is a reliable player at a league minimum contract, on a rookie deal for his career. But if the implication is that you're bringing in Schenn, that, your window is now, he's just sort of bumped out of the mix he's blocked for you. And so if that was enough to get it done, I do agree that giving your top prospect and a first-round pick, it's tough. I get it. I'm not really over the moon about trying to add Easton Cowan to do that. But I got to tell you, it's given where they're at and what this window is and what the other opportunities are, I just haven't seen someone present to me something that is realistic, actually realistic, not pie in the sky. Hey, well, what if they were able to go to another organization? There's a player that's name hasn't been mentioned. Are there years where there are those types of players? The NBA just saw Luka Doncic traded, right? Sure, of course those things can happen. But I'm just trying to deal with what is in front of me, and that is by far, to me, the best fit for this team in this window, in this moment. And if the player does become available, I just think that you kind of got to roll the dice and say, damn, there's a lot of positive fit here, and there are a lot of reasons that you can believe it's going to improve your odds of actually being able to do something. And last thing on this, too, I think Ryan O'Reilly is a better player than Schenn. I just do. I think that what he's able to do defensively in the faceoff circle, his pedigree in the postseason, I'd rather have him. But it's they're the same age. In fact, I think Ryan O'Reilly's a little bit older, and they got the same amount of points this year. And I haven't seen that raised by one person who is mentioning the Ryan O'Reilly thing. It's he makes 4.5, but that's what you were trying to get Schenn on as well.
Yeah, O'Reilly had a monster year last year, and
Yeah.
man, Nashville's been a disaster this season. And it, yeah, and you know, bigger, more, you know,
Like I said, he's better. I'm not debating between the two guys in terms of like which one I would rather have. I'm just saying I do think it's a
and
little
O'Reilly's
funny.
at 4.5 already without
Yes.
retention.
Yes.
So
But
yeah,
he would also
yeah.
cost you more, period, to get done. Like
Yeah.
he's not viewed as, oh, well, we're trying to get off of this money, which is some of the argument that St. Louis would make to themselves. Like that's actually part of the Schenn thing that scares me a little bit from St. Louis's standpoint is like if they are trading him, right, then I kind of think they view it as a contract that is going to age really poorly because they have more information on him than anybody.
It already is. He's already not worth the contract.
Yeah.
Like I think that's undisputable.
Yep, that's correct.
So yeah, I mean and I think that's why it's not going to get done because I think that it's just the ask is too high for what he is, and to get the number down to where the Leafs need it to be, and they have other options. So there's no question it's a good fit. Like it's not ridiculous. Like if they would do it for the first round pick, then I think it happened.
Oh yeah, you do that in a heartbeat.
But they can't get it done for that. So
Yep. Okay, so then let's do the exercise of who they are in on or who they could be in on. And let's start by saying, have you heard any murmurs of guys that they are more interested in than, say, others?
Well, I think we're going back to the stuff we've been talking about for most of the season on who the names are going to be. Like I haven't heard a lot of new names. I've been poking around and wondering about Jake Evans out of Montreal. And I know, again, like not a super sexy name, but he's a younger guy, good defensively. He's produced more offensively this year than we've seen in the past. Really good on the face-off. He's a Toronto kid. Cap hit's not very high. You know, I think that could be something that makes sense. But I think he's further down their list than some of the other names that we've talked about so much, you know, and I think that if it's not Schenn, then we're talking again about Lawton or Yanni Gourde, you know, maybe Bukestad comes back in the mix out of Utah, but I don't think I don't have any like new names for you other than maybe Evans out of Montreal. Like it's not like there's been a whole bunch of new entrants in the available center options for the Leafs.
So I want to say something on the Gourde thing. If you're talking about like declining player and the numbers around a guy, it's like his are pretty startling. But if the price for him is extremely low and you're taking kind of a lottery ticket, it's not the deadline that I want because I really do think that this team should be aggressive. I've outlined the case multiple times on this show, whether it's been the record, the style in which they play, the top pairing, the goaltending, the stars in their prime. Frankly, the coaching staff working, like, you know, they just won coaching staff of the month in February. And I think it's actually been a little bit under-discussed how good of a job those guys have done this year, especially in light of the departure of a coaching staff that was really effective in regular seasons. Like, there's just been no, like, it's like because they've been so drama-free, I actually think that people have sort of overlooked them at times. We've talked about the power play, but ultimately it's like, yeah, okay, it's been good. Like on a whole this season, are we still uber complaining about the power play now that it's like right there? Like it's ahead of Florida's power play.
Let's wait till the playoffs.
Sure. Yeah, of course we're going to judge it on that. I'm just saying that when we're doing these statistics and we're talking about this team in a certain way, the one place that I think has drawn some ire has been the power play percentage and the slump that they went through. They will absolutely be judged on postseason success. But like, yeah, they're ahead of Florida's power play percentage now with the lulls that they've had. They've made some of the adjustments, whether it's been like showing up with the second power play or doing there's just been other things that have happened here with this team. I think that the penalty kill is at a lull, but ultimately it's been good. The goaltending, we don't ever talk about coaching with goaltending, but it's like, yeah, they spend a lot of money on their coaching staff with the goalies, and it's worked out for these guys. They've kept them healthy. They've kept them fresh. Wohl just had a bad game, and it felt like that what the hell are we seeing here? We've never seen this. Like, we've seen this like a couple of times all season long. There's just so many cases for this team to actually be aggressive that I want more. But Gourde, what is your sense of like what the asking price is becoming for him? Because yeah, like we said, the market's still limited, but how are you giving up anything of consequence for someone who's old, small, and hurt?
That's not a great combination, is it?
No.
I mean, I think with him, you get the 50% retention for sure. So that makes his salary down to, $2.5 million, which is relatively easy to fit in, certainly easier than Schenn. And I think the ask is if Gord had been healthy and had a good year, like even the year that he had last year, I think that the Seattle's flirting with asking for a first-round pick for him, but I don't think it's going to be anything close to that. I mean, I think it's probably like a third-round pick right now for Gord is what they're going to be looking for. And buyer beware a little bit because you don't know what you're going to get. Older player hasn't played a lot this year, but for that kind of a flyer and that kind of an asking price and that kind of a salary, it could make sense. And again, I think you got to think of it as the Leafs have a wish list, and maybe Schenn's at the top of that, and then there's some other names. I don't think Gord's number 2, but the question is when they get down to the deadline, if they can't get their first or second or even their third option, is it kind of like a break glass and like, okay, we'll go with Yanni Gord? And I think that potentially could happen.
Okay, so let's play this game then for you, because I don't have a strong opinion on this whatsoever. If it's between Jake Evans, Yanni Gord, and Nick Bjugstad, hey, these are the break glass emergency centers, which one do you think is the best fit for the Leafs?
Oh, man.
I'm sorry. Again, I couldn't answer this question, so I'm asking it to you.
I think the interesting thing with Gord is that he's done it before, right? So then I think that there's like something there where you think like, okay, if he gets healthy, there could be some magic there. He's a playoff player. He's played in those big moments. Not as good offensively, but if you're looking at Bjugstad and Evans, like they're not good offensively either, right? So I think that in that case, the tie goes to the veteran who's got the experience, and you get your medical staff with him and you try and rebuild him and don't play him a lot before the playoffs and just, give him as many maintenance days as you can, and hopefully you can get him to where as good as he can be.
Yeah. I know he's been hurt recently, but 17 goals in the last 2 years. He played 80 last year.
Yeah. They've used him like he's been playing some on the fourth line this year. Yeah. Like he's not playing with star players, that's for sure.
Well, and if you look at there's again, these stats to me are always really difficult to kind of go through, and I like puck battle wins, right? I'm like, who's tracking this? Like what is the determination of it? But
some guy in a room.
Yeah, but the guy in the room has decided that like his puck battle win percentage is like dropped pretty significantly year over year. He's not even doing it as much, and yeah, the hits have dropped off quite a bit as well. And so like I guess I'm just warning against it where it's like I'm going to talk myself into it. I'm going to basically try to talk myself into whatever the Leafs end up doing. But yeah, it's hard to see Florida add Seth Jones and potentially be doing more. And like I'm not a I don't think I was like a Seth Jones guy, but he goes to Florida. I'm like, oh, that's going to work. This is going to work. Look at their top 4.
It's the same thing if you slot him properly. Like if he becomes your third best defenseman he's playing more sheltered minutes, he's going to be amazing. Like you watch him in Chicago and it's like, yeah, he's overwhelmed playing 28 minutes on a terrible team, but he's going to be good. He's going to be good. Like he's a beast physically, and he can skate so well. So, and at that number, with the cap going up, it seems totally fine. I think that's a brilliant move that teams like Florida and Tampa and Vegas seem to be able to make every year.
Well, the other part of it too is that he's going to want to recoup his reputation. Like there's going to be a degree of, okay, I want it out. You're the team that came and got me. There's a lot of eyes on me in terms of, like not necessarily the market that I'm playing in, but the NHL at large of, hey, can this guy recapture it? And if you're him, you've kind of bet on yourself a bit by making this so public, getting out of Chicago with as much noise as there was. But also, like this is a son of a professional athlete. Like I think he understands the business, the narratives, all the things that surround it. I just have like a tough time seeing it not be a move that we all end up looking at and celebrating. That's where I'm at with that.
Do you think that move puts more pressure on the Leafs just because it's in the division and they're going to run into Florida?
Again, like I know I keep coming back to the same thing, but it's because Schenn is the only splashy option that I've seen that's real. The reason, part of it that I like it is... part is what you said there with the slotting, that all of a sudden he's a third line center being asked to give you 14 minutes a night and go out and hit people and give your room some juice, and that added leadership and the je ne sais quoi of it all of a guy that is like that is a captain. But you're trying to win the division. Like they've been so hot lately. It's been awesome for them to actually just continue to win these games. And this Atlantic race is super compelling. And I don't want, I'm sure there will be some people that go, do you really want to burn out trying to get to the postseason? Like, no, but these other teams are going to treat it the exact same way. Florida's going to make a push to try to do this. And if you're asking me about what is the most impactful odds, right? Any player you acquire, to me, is not going to be more impactful than avoiding the first round matchup with one of those two teams, and the benefit of having Florida and Tampa have to play each other in the first round. So, like, there's this incredibly important run that we're going to see post-deadline, which I'm so excited for, because the last few seasons, God, since the first year of this core against Washington, it's been a death march to the postseason. And now there are actual stakes that I genuinely think are going to impact the postseason odds more than any other factor that they're going to add now, other than health.
Yeah. What a huge difference, too, if you get to play Detroit or something like that.
Exactly. Detroit or Florida in round one.
Yeah. No, it's massive. Massive.
Like, get it done. Do it. That's why you have to be aggressive. My God. Like I said, the stars have aligned for you. You're right there at the top of the conference. You've got your core in their primes, a pending unrestricted free agent who might walk. Like, I don't think he's going to, but I think that there's at least a chance. Mitch Marner's not here. The way that the rumblings have been, you've got a blue line full of guys that are older, but good, right? You've got a top pairing that works, but how old's Chris Tanev now? 35? 34?
I think he's 35 in the fall or like December, I think.
I'm just saying, like, the Chris Tanev thing is like, if you're worried about Brayden Schenn's timeline, you should also be worried about what Chris Tanev looks like 2 years from now, right? Like, just what is Jake McCabe going to look like 2 years from now? Morgan Riley's north of 30. OEL is north of 30. Like, this is a young team with like 8 more years to go in this window. This is the window.
No. Yeah. No, it's 3 years, right?
Yes.
You know, and you've got 3 more years of the Austin Matthews contract, and that's what you're looking at. That's why, you know, people who say, you know, like they can't trade the picks and all this stuff, like by the time those picks are giving you anything, this is all going to be over.
Yep, correct. And I also think that there's an advantage to trading the picks now, because if the cap does go up as much as we're expecting it to, it's like Toronto will once again be able to flex their financial might and use their muscle in a way that they haven't been able to throughout this entire, you know, post-COVID period. Like, for rebuilding their team through free agency, they will be a bigger threat than they have been in the years past, where it's like, why would I go there? I'm getting taxed, and I can just go to Dallas. It's like, no, you're back at the top.
2 years from now, I think there's only going to be 10 teams that spend to the cap. You know, when the cap's up at 113, the Leafs are going to have an advantage over, you know, 2/3 of the league financially that they haven't had in the cap era at all.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm not saying that you should only build your team through free agency in this sport. Like, that's not going to work. But ultimately, right now, to capitalize on this window, you have to make a move that, listen, the internet and the charts are going to say is dumb. All right? That's the kind of move you have to make. James, it was great catching up. It's great to have you back. If the Leafs make a huge move, we'll have you back this week. And if not, we'll talk to you next.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks,
see you, buddy.
JD.